Okay, so I guess in theory, this will be our last lecture before the final presentations next week, unless you want me to talk about something else next Monday. But we will have our presentations on Wednesday. So we will decide the presentation order and the time for each group after this Sunday. I think that's the deadline Dongyan set for filling out the group information. So we will announce the group order, presentation order, and how much time each group has next Monday. That's the plan. And so for today, I'm going to finish my lecture on the measures of association. So with that, I will assign the last homework. So that will cover the materials we talked about since the second last homework. And then since the last homework, and then we will, so yeah, but you will still have 2 weeks to work on this. So that's independent of the final project. Yeah, so, and I've listened to some very interesting ideas from the groups about what you want to work on. So I'm really looking forward to the presentations. All right, so let's continue. Last time we talked about we started the discussion about measures of association. And the first measure is about the linear relationship between two scalar valued random variables, X and Y. Both are one-dimensional. And the Pearson correlation is the thing we use, right? And we talk about the population level Pearson correlation based on the joint distribution of X and Y. Then we talk about the sample level Pearson correlation, which can be computed based on a sequence of pairs of numbers. So xi, yi, I from 1 to n. So, and we said that this Pearson correlation has this interesting relationship with the R-square measure used in linear regression. And even though if we regress X on Y versus Y on X, the two regressions are not equivalent, but interestingly, they have the same R-square. So that's where we stopped last time. And so to continue, we will talk about the second type of relationship called a monotone. So in a lot of cases, the relationship may not be linear, but they can be monotone and still of interest. So for example, let me just give you some interesting relationships. So like in this case, if X and Y, if the true relationship is like this, so it's not linear but monotone, and the observation you observe is scattered around this line. So then in this case, you may want to a measure that is better than the Pearson correlation. Because in this case, even though there's no noise, right? So there's some noise here, but even in the ideal case, no noise, we have just a curve. But with this curve, the Pearson correlation, which we call the rho, X and Y, okay, let's say here, the rho XY will still be less than 1 because it's not linear. So motivated by this, how do we capture such monotone relationships? There are two popular correlations for this purpose. So the first one is called the Spearman rank correlation, which a lot of people use. So for the Spearman rank correlation, we will only discuss it in terms of our sample level, like based on X1, Y1 to XM, YM. So instead of the population level, and here XI, YI are both scalar, one-dimensional. So for the Spearman rank correlation, the idea is very simple. So you first convert your X1 to Xn to their corresponding ranks within X. So basically what you do is that you convert X1 to Xm as their ranks, okay? In terms of that, so let me just call this Rx1 to Rxm. So by rank, I mean that each one is returned by its order from the smallest to the largest. So if it's the minimum, the rank is 1. If it's maximum, the rank is n. So that's the same as what we have seen before. And for the Y1 to Ym, we similarly turn them into ranks. Okay, and then the Spearman correlation, if I call it the S for Spearman, this is the last name, Spearman's correlation. Okay, it's defined based on these two sets of numbers. I'll use small x, small y to denote that. So let me just call this small x to be the set of x1 to be the vector of x1 to xn. Let me just do that. And y to be the vector of y1 to yn. So with this notation, then the Spearman rank correlation is just defined as the Pearson correlation. So I remember last time we used the notation, Okay, so let me just say the Pearson correlation. Pearson correlation of x and y. That's it. So in other words, the Spearman correlation is regarded as the Pearson correlation applied to ranks instead of the original values. And there are two advantages of doing so. One is that because when you turn to ranks, they become linear, right? So it can capture any monotone relationships. So as long as there are perfect monotone relationship like this, then the Spearman correlation will be equal to 1 or -1. So basically its range is the same as the Pearson correlation from -1 to 1. And second, because of this rank conversion, Spearman rank correlation is less sensitive to outliers. So I would say that this makes it robust to outliers. So that's why in bioinformatic analysis, sometimes this is what we need when we do data exploration. So for example, let me just give you one extreme example. So let's say that when you plot your data points, m points, x and y, let's say that you have a scatter near 0, but you have a very far away point right here. So in this case, if you compute the Pearson correlation, the Pearson correlation could be large, okay? Because you can have a very clear line going through this point and the scatter. But if you calculate the Spearman correlation, you can have a small Spearman correlation. So the reason is that if you convert to rank, then this point is no longer an outlier. So therefore you can have a scatter, right? In terms of the ranks. So that's one advantage. So regarding, and also, I mean, in biological data analysis, whether this is something you think is meaningful or not, I think that's quite subjective. Okay, sometimes you may think, yeah, the two variables have not much correlation when they're both small, and this is due to noise, but this one is a large signal, so it's meaningful. That's possible. So if you think it that way, then you would actually fall into this Pearson correlation idea, right? You want to keep the scale. But otherwise, if you think, oh, this is an outlier, I don't trust it, then Spearman correlation fits better of your idea. So that's why I say it's very subjective. Okay, so another commonly used monotone measure is called Kendall's tau. Kendall, another last name, Kendall's tau. Okay, so this is actually also based on the monotone relationship. So based on two pairs, what it does is try to compare every pair. So by pair, every pair, I should say every two pairs. Yeah, that's correct. Every two pairs. Like xi, yi, this is one pair. And another pair is xj, yj. Okay, for any I doesn't equal to j. I and j go from 1 to n. So in the Kendall's tau definition, you would just define this pair. Let me just call that ij pair. For this ij pair, you want to call them as concordant, discordant, or neither. Okay, so you will categorize this into 3 types. So The first type is called concordant. By concordant, it means that, so the direction from I to j in terms of x is the same as the direction in terms of y. So basically, this says that it's if xi is greater than xj and yi greater than yj. So you see they follow the same order, then you call this ij pair concordant. Or the direction can be reversed. Xi less than xj and yi less than yj. Okay, when this happens, it's also called this concordant. And for discordant, it's xi greater than xj and yi less than yj. So you see the directions of x and y are reversed. Or the other way, xi less than xj and yi greater than yj. Okay, so finally, when we say it's neither discordant or concordant, we have types. Okay, so this happens when xi equals xj or yi equals yj. When you have a tie, then you don't call this ij pair as concordant or discordant. So that's the categorization. And based on this, then the Kendall's tau is defined, and the notation is this Greek letter tau. It's defined as simply the number of concordant pairs minus the number of discordant pairs. So you can imagine that if the x and y are perfectly monotone and there's no tie, then all the pairs should be concordant, right? So once xi greater than xj, then yi should be greater than yj. So when all the pairs are concordant, you want to have this measure equal to 1. And how many pairs do you have? N choose 2. So that's why you normalize this difference by this N choose 2, so that you can make sure the maximum is 1, of tau is 1. And also when the relationship is monotone decreasing, right? So then when x is greater than xj, yi is less than yj, and there's no tie, in that case, you will only have discordant pairs and choose 2 of many. So that's why you will have -1. So therefore, here, this Kendall's tau is from -1 to +1. Okay, and I want to say that both are rank-based correlations. They only care about ranks instead of the absolute values. However, the Kendall's tau is useful, I think, more from an interesting theoretical point of view. Like there's a technique called copulus. So in the copulus technique, which is very useful for modeling the dependence of variables. So it allows you to use the marginal distribution of variables combined with the copula to get multivariate joint distribution. So this is a multivariate statistics technique. So, and in the copula, Kendall's tau plays a crucial role. So you will have a very interesting result directly related to Kendall's tau. So that's why it's very interesting. So what monotone means in this context? No, monotone here is not a transformation. It's just the nature of the data. It's the relationship. So when there's no noise, when you believe there's no noise, when you're scattered, the data points lie perfectly on a curve, then this is what we mean by monotone. So to be exact, monotone means that our pairs are either, so if it's perfectly monotone, all the pairs are concordant. That's what we mean. We didn't do any transformation of our data. So it's not data transformation or processing. We're just analyzing a scatter plot. Yeah, okay. Okay, so to be exact, maybe let me just say it this way. So the discussion, the whole discussion is about this thing. So maybe just try to summarize this into this box about what we're talking about here. So if we believe that our data is generated from this model for the ith data point, the yi is some function f of xi plus some noise epsilon. Okay, if this is our data generated model, so then when we talk about a linear, we mean it's about the f. Okay, so is f linear or is f a monotone function, L or etc. So does this make more sense? That's what we mean. Okay, so we talk about these two things. First, the linear monotone. And the third type of relationship I want to talk about is the functional relationships. But okay, I want to also say that this is just one way to look at it, because putting the generative model in this way, we are basically considering x and y to be not symmetrical. But all the measures we discussed before so far, like the Pearson, Spearman, Kendall's, they are all symmetric about x and y. Okay, so therefore, it's possible the noise is not just added in terms of y, you may also add to the x. So maybe it's better to say that it's kind of like, maybe a better way to put it is to say you should have x, you should have, let me say it. Right, I think I need another notation. Okay, so maybe let's say this. So let's say you have some zi, f, zi, f is some function, okay? And then what you observe is that xi is zi plus some noise, and yi is fzi plus some noise, okay? But the f is the truth. So you want to recover the truth from the data. And also the measure is about the relative strength of the truth in relation to the noise. So basically, if there's no noise, completely clean, you just observe zi, f, zi, and you want the measure to give you a value of 1, like an absolute value of 1. So that's why in the Pearson correlation case, when f is perfectly linear, when the slope is positive, you will get a Pearson correlation of 1. When the slope is negative, you're going to get a Pearson correlation of -1. And for the Spearman correlation, if f is monotone, when there's no noise, you're going to get a value of 1 for monotone increasing, -1 for monotone decreasing. Okay, so does that make more sense? Okay. So this is just a measure of association to explore pairwise relationships. But people may wonder, what if the relationship I'm interested in is not monotone? And it can still be interesting, right? So for example, what if my x and my y takes this case, this is like a parabola. So in this case, the monotone measures will not work because it first goes down and then goes up. So to capture cases like this, so this has been a very active research area for more than half a century, especially from a mathematical perspective. Can we really define a measure that can capture any functional relationship between two variables? And we want the measure of such relationship to reach a value of 1 when this is a perfect 1-to-1 function. So given an x, you have the corresponding y. No noise. And also, you want the measure to be equal to 0 if and only if the two variables are independent. Okay, so for this purpose, let's first introduce this correlation called maximal correlation. And some people call it this Rennie correlation because of this Rennie paper, the paper published by him in 1959. So in that paper, he proposed several criteria for an ideal measure. And this measure will satisfy the criteria he proposed. So basically, the idea is that, so on the population level, between two random variables, we want to define the correlation to be, we want the correlation to be 0 if and only if, we often write this in short as IFF, if and only if X and Y are independent, okay, on the population level. And second, we want the correlation to be equal to 1 if we can have, or I should say, this is probably if, and yeah, it should be IFF. If this, we can write Y as some function of X. Okay, so if they have that perfect one-to-one correspondence, and of course, you need to have some constraint on this function. And I think in the whole discussion, sometimes people refer to this in the L2 class for the function. So you need the function to be relatively good, to be smooth. Okay, so regarding this definition, then the correlation he proposed is this. So the theoretical definition, which we call the max core between two variables X and Y, is defined as the supreme. You can consider this to be like a more advanced version of maximum when the possibilities is infinite. So in the supreme of two functions F and G, let's say we put them in the L2 class, but they could be changed to other classes. So that when you define the Pearson correlation on the population level of the transformed X by F and the transformed Y by G. Okay, so you just try to maximize the Pearson correlation over all possible functional transformations of X and Y. And that is what you call maximal correlation. So you can see that the maximal correlation is very flexible because even when your relationship is like, if X and Y, the two variables, lie perfectly on a circle. Okay, so maybe let me call this 0 here. Okay, so if 0 is here, and if I draw a circle like this, so which corresponds to X squared plus Y squared equals to 1. So this is not even a functional relationship, but still you can actually have a very nice transformation to do. So what you can do is that if you define fx to be x squared and gy to be y squared, okay, if you define it this way, then you can see you have fx plus gy equals 1. So based on this, you would have fx equals to 1 minus gy. So then when you calculate the Pearson correlation of fx and gy, you are going to get a -1 because these two things are perfectly negatively correlated and they are linear. So in this case, the max core, which is defined as the sup of the absolute value of Pearson correlation, max core of x and y, will become equal to 1. So you can see that in the circle case, the maximal correlation in theory should still give you a value of 1. Okay, and also people can show that in the original paper, if you define the maximal correlation in this way, then this nice property about the equivalence with independence will satisfy. So you can use the maximal correlation to check if two variables are independent. And by assuming that you know the population, the distribution. Okay, so that's the ideal case. But after it was proposed for, I would say, 30 years, people didn't know how to compute it. Because you can see from this formula, it's just a mathematical expression. But let's say that I give you my data, like n pairs, x1, y1 to xn, yn. How would you compute it, right? There's no clear way of doing that. So thankfully, there was a very interesting paper, which was, so I just call it sample level, which was published in 1984, I think, or 1985. So that is called alternating conditional expectation. So it provides a way for approximating this maximal correlation definition at a sample level. So let me just call it, it's called alternating conditional expectation. So short as ACE. So this was published by Dr. Leo Breiman, who was the author of the CART algorithm for doing the tree-based classification of random forest, and Friedman. Friedman is still a professor at Stanford. So they wrote this paper in 1985 about alternating conditional expectation, which is a very smart way of solving this problem. And we haven't talked about the data fitting yet. So that's what we're talking about right now. So in this definition, it's about the distribution. So you know the truth, you know the ground truth, the joint distribution. So there's no fitting, data fitting, model fitting at all. And when we talk about overfitting, it's when we have data, but no ground truth. And this is a conceptual question. Does that make sense? So when you have the population, what you see is what's true. There's no statistical inference involved. And the overfitting issue is only when you have data to do the computation. So that's why this algorithm provides the first solution to that problem. Okay, yeah. Okay, so what does it do? So given that our time is limited, I will just try to be brief. Okay, so let me just introduce the algorithm, and more details can be found in the lecture notes I posted, lecture 10, from my previous year's teaching. Okay, so basically the idea is that the algorithm start, and the name has alternating. So what does it mean by alternating, right? So you will start with some initialization. So you would set the f function, the function to be applied to your x variable, and here x and y are both, scalar. So again, let me put the data here. It's x1 to xn, or y1 to yn. So they are paired, right? xi, yi is paired, or maybe better to put it as x1, y1 to xn, yn. Okay. So we first set the f0x just by defining this. Okay, so let me see. We just define this as x minus the mean. Okay, minus the center of x. So this x bar is the average of x1 to xn. That's the initialization. And then for k from 1 to 2 to 3 and so on, in the kth iteration, we let the g, let me see, that's the problem. I have the, okay, so maybe I should talk about g first. Okay, so let g k minus 1, okay, in the previous round at x, based on what? Based on the way you want to do the expectation. Based on the way you want to do the expectation. Let me see, how do I write it? probably I'll just say that it's just, so it's just this. Let me write the theory first, and then we put a hat. So it's the expectation of this fk minus 1, the previous f function you have, applied to the variable x, conditional on y. Okay, it's this one. But here, this is about the joint distribution. So we put a hat on it. So in other words, what does it mean, actually? So what it means is that, sorry, it should be gy. Conditional on y equals small y. So what it means, so to estimate this, basically what you're doing is that you pick the yi's that are close to y, okay? So for example, you may do the KNN approach, k nearest neighbor, that's one approach. Or you may want to define another way to define how you consider the yi to be equal to y. So you may not have exactly equal, but you just pick the ones that are close to y, okay? And then average the fk minus 1 yi, average those. So for each of the, sorry, xi, my bad. So for you pick those i's that are close to y, and then you took their xi value, you perform the previous transformation, and then you take the average. So that's how we are going to approximate this conditional expectation, right? And also in the algorithm name, you have the conditional expectation. So basically what you're doing is this. So let me just draw a scatter plot to help you understand. So let's say you have points like this. Okay, so what we are doing in this step is that given every value y you want to evaluate, you took a small neighborhood of it. Okay, let's say you have a point, the 3 points in the neighborhood, you find their corresponding x value, you apply the transformation in the previous step you find for x. You apply the transformation and then you take the average. So that's how you are gonna define this g function. So you can see this is what we call a non-parametric approach because we are just working on the data points. We don't assume the function g has any specific form. And then regarding that overfitting question, that's a very good question. That question is actually depending on the definition of the neighborhood. How would you define it to be close? If you define it to be very small, then you are basically looking at one point itself, right? Then that's the problem. But if you define it to be large, then you have a very big neighborhood, then the curve, the function you define may be very smooth, that may not fit it very well. So that's why this is always a question about choosing the bandwidth as in non-parametric estimation. Okay, so this is how we define the gk minus 1, and then we update f. So f is updated similarly. For the next f, fkx, we will define as the estimated expectation of this gk function applied to y, given the x conditional x being this thing. And also, I want to say that this conditional expectation is a very important concept in probability. So what we know is that once you take the conditional expectation, the result is a function of your condition, right? Because what's above it, before it, is being taken over in the expectation, but you are left with a condition. So that's why this conditional expectation by definition would be a function of small x, and that's what we want. And similarly, here the conditional expectation would be a function of small y, and that's what we want. So in this way, what do we do? So here the calculation is that you pick the xi's close to x, and then average their gk minus 1 x's. So you pick that transformation and do the average, and then you alternate those two steps. So in each step, you're just doing conditional expectation and until the algorithm converges. G of Y. No, this one, when I write the expectation, I'm using the variable notation. I'm using the random variable xi, xy, not the data, small xi, small yi. So that's why this is capital Y, not yi. So the capitalization, the next line, pick the one. No, here, sorry, my bad. Yeah, that's right. And average their yi's. Yeah, thank you for. Okay, so I didn't explain why this algorithm would work, but I want to give you the intuition behind it. So this algorithm basically changes this problem. So the intuition behind this algorithm, is that it changes this problem about finding the maximum of, let me just do the square, Pearson correlation square of fx and gy. It turns this problem into minimizing, or maybe to be consistent to nth, minimizing the minimum of this squared loss of this expectation of fx minus gy squared. So they found equivalence between these two approaches. That is, if you consider the fx and gy have variance equal to 1, then the square of the Pearson correlation is basically the square of their covariance, of the covariance of fx and gy. So basically it's saying that maximizing the covariance, of x and of maximum covariance of fx and gy is equivalent to minimizing the expected squared difference. That's the intuition. And so with this fact holding, they can just show that to minimize this expected square difference, you could do this alternating conditional expectation algorithm. So that's the whole idea behind it. But as people pointed out, there's a key thing is about how to estimate this expectation, and that is non-parametric and involves setting up the bandwidth. So you may want to avoid overfitting. Similar as when you do the kernel density estimation. If you do that in R density function, you can see that the bandwidth would affect like how curly your density curve is or how smooth it is. Okay, so I want to say maximal correlation is a very nice thing to try. And there's an R package for doing this. This R package is called ACE-Pack. I used it myself and it's very interesting. It's very easy to use. So this just provides the function you can compute for maximal correlation using this algorithm. So it has multiple disjoint X intervals for the same Y. So what do you mean by disjoint X intervals?
Yeah, sorry, I meant like in the graphical example you gave here of X and Y. In this example, given what the Y value and its interval, a small interval, we only have one X interval where we are sampling points to compute the mean of f of xi. What if like after a while the function decreases and then we have another X interval where there are points that
I guess you're talking about a case like this. So there doesn't seem to be a one-to-one relationship, right? I think you're talking about a case like this. So
no, also like if it is if the function like first increases and then decreases, right? We have two intervals.
That's a very good question. That's indeed a very good question. But in that case, we actually, you know, this is the interesting thing about this algorithm. So yeah, so let's say that if you have a like this, right? So this is the original motivating question. So you don't need to make sure so in this case, let me just tell you why this doesn't matter. So in this case, let me just say that y is, okay, I'm just making it up, 1 minus x squared. Okay, just like this. So in this case, what you can do is that you can just say gy equals to y, but you can set fx equals to x squared, right? Then doing so, you can have the Pearson correlation of fx gy equals to -1, and that will give you the max core of x and y equals 1. So you're fine. But seeing that, you can see I don't need to do anything for my gy. So basically, you see, if I pick an interval, if I pick a neighborhood of y here to see the points, right? And then these points are going to be used to do what? So this in this step, when I do this the interval, I'm going to just update the function for y. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take these points, apply the transformation of x, and then do the average. But now you can see the transformations on x is quadratic. So therefore, the average will give me something still close to y. So that doesn't matter. I hope that makes sense. So basically, even though the x are scattered, but after the previous transformation, they may become unified.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for, that's a great question. Yeah, but I mean, go back to this example. In this example, it's not really a functional relationship because the relationship between x and y are no longer one-to-one, right? So if you fit it, you may want to see I have a cross shape like that. So if you are interested in this type of relationship, I actually have a paper for this. If you are interested, you can check it out. So I call it generalized R square. So basically, I generalized the Pearson correlation square to handle this multi-line case, but it's not really this functional relationship. We are just retrieving the correlation. Exactly. We're not fitting a function. So this is not a prediction problem. So we are not doing a prediction, like how to predict y from x. We're just learning the relationship. But I have to admit that these two problems may be correlated. So f and g are depending on how you think about irrelevance. So you may say that, oh, with this transformation, then the transform variables become linearly correlated. Then this correlation may tell me something, right? In that case, you cannot say it's not useful, but it's not just as a way you can use for direct prediction. That's what I think. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. Right, so this is the maximal correlation, which is something I found very fascinating myself. So that's why I want to introduce it here. And so in many cases, you may want, so these measures, let me tell you their use. They are often used for screening. Let's say you have many variables, like many genes in your data set, and you want to find which pairs have interesting relationships. You could apply this. So you could just apply it to tens of thousands of variable pairs and see which pairs give you a high correlation value. And then you may examine those pairs and they may tell you something. So for example, the correlations can be used to construct a gene network, right? Then for each gene, it's a node in the network and their edge has a weight, and the weight is just the correlation value. So in that case, with the network, we can do some like gene node clustering, or people call that community detection or module detection, and then that may reveal some information to you. So like you can see here, different measures of association capture different types of relationship, and therefore the resulting network will look different. So I would say that if you are, and we are going from the most specific relationship, the linear relationship, to very general relationship. So you can see that and in your homework, actually the homework I'm going to assign today, you're going to try those measures and play with them in numerical studies. So you are going to see that if we calculate the power of each measure, the more general measure is less powerful than Pearson correlation for linear relationships. So that's expected, right? The more you find, the less specific you are. But on the other hand, they can capture some relationships that will be missed by Pearson correlation. So that's the trade-off. Okay, so this is the maximal correlation and its algorithm. So then I'm going to talk about another interesting correlation. So this is called distance correlation. Okay, so this distance correlation, I think is mathematically very elegant. And this was from a paper, a statistics paper published by Dr. Zeckley and his students. So in two papers, one in 2005, one in 2007. Let me see, sorry, I think one 2007, one 2009. That's the correct years. So what's actually very amazing about this measure, because I talked with him personally about this development, I found that he and his students spent like around 10 years to really develop those measures. And to me, that's really impressive. But the end result is very, very surprising. So basically, the distance correlation has a very elegant mathematical explanation. And meanwhile, they have a very simple algorithm for computation. Also, due to the time's sake, I'm just going to talk about the algorithm at a sample level. So what's special about the distance correlation is that now you are not restricted to scalar values. So you can have each data point xi as m-dimensional, or let me say p-dimensional, and you may have each point yi to be q-dimensional. And the key is that p and q can be different. So they don't have to be in the same space. That's the special thing. Previously, all the discussion is about xi is a real value, yi is a real value, but we are no longer restricting ourselves to that. They are still paired. So for example, xi could be the ith image. Yi could, like some person, the ith person's fMRI image, that the yi is that person's age. So you could have variables like this. So totally in different units, different spaces, but you still have them paired. So you have x1, y1 to xn, yn. Okay, that's your data. You still have them paired up. So the distance correlation is defined simply based on the distances. So in other words, you don't need to compute the distance between xi and yi. That's not possible because they're in different spaces, right? You cannot compute the distance between an image and an age. But you can compute distances across x1 to xn themselves and across y1 to yn themselves. So then the question is, given those pairwise distances in each space, how can you use them to come up with a correlation measure? So that's the distance correlation's magic. All right, so let's try to define to start. Okay, so the algorithm on the sample level, the algorithm does this, or computation. It's very easy. So you first compute, you define aij, okay? You define this as the distance of xi and xj. You can use your own way to define a distance between these two things. And correspondingly, you have bij, which is defined as the distance of yi and yj. Okay, so given all these distances, you perform a strategy called double centering. So double centering, which will make sure that when you sum up for all the i's, I from 1 to n, by keeping j fixed, you get 0. You sum up for all the j's for keeping I fixed, you get 0. That's what we want. So therefore, to do the double centering, we need to define the row average. So basically, we first define AI dot average. This notation means that we keep I fixed by taking the average over j's. Okay, and similarly, we would define A dot J bar. So that's the average. We let I go from 1 to n and let J fixed. And finally, we define the double average, A dot dot average. So that's the average of all the ij's. I from 1 to n, j from 1 to m, sum of aij, and there are n square of those, we take the average. Okay, so with those definition, then we define the double-centered distances as capital Aij. So it's just Aij minus AI dot bar minus A dot J bar plus A dot dot bar. Okay, so we just add back the overall average because we don't want to divide minus that for twice. So, and also similarly, Bij for the Y space is defined similarly. Bi dot B dot J. Okay, so with those double centering, we're there. So then they define the sample level distance covariance. Okay, so they give the sample, they define the sample level distance covariance simply as the average Aij times Bij. That's it. So they define this as the product of the distances between the two spaces. Since we're doing the double centering, we don't need to subtract the mean in our covariance definition, right? So the covariance defined as the expectation of the cross product, but you used to need to subtract the mean. But here we don't need to, since we have done the centering. Okay, so that's the covariance. We also can define sample level distance variance. Okay. For variance of y, sample level distance variance of x, it's defined just as the average of Aij squared. And also the sample level distance variance of y. Okay. Finally, you use the correlation definition to put them together. So finally, the sample level distance correlation of x and y is defined as just this sample level distance covariance x and y, okay, what we computed before, divided by the square root of the distance variance of x times the distance variance of y. So you use the Pearson correlation formula to put them together. Okay, so what's special about this is that you are no longer working with the x1 to xn or y1 to yn numerically. You don't take them as input into this distance directly. Instead, you first convert those values into their pairwise distances. Then distances are all on the same in the same space, right? From in the real space, from in the non-negative real space. So that's why you can work with the distances. And I think that's very interesting. And also the distance correlation has a nice theoretical property, same as the maximal correlation. So what's nice is that on the population level, you can also show that, the authors show that, so the distance correlation of x and y equals to 0 is equivalent to that x and y are independent. So it has this nice theoretical property as the maximal correlation has. But the maximum correlation is restricted to, at least the algorithm I introduced, the alternating condition expectation is restricted to scalar valued x and y. But here, this distance correlation can let x and y in different spaces. So that's why I think this can open up a lot of interesting applications, especially like the example I said, like one x is like the x is the image and the y is the age, right? So for a lot of variables of different forms, you may consider using the distance correlation to explore the relationship. So that's the crucial part of the what we call the exploratory data analysis, short as EDA in statistics. So you work with your data, you play with your data and try to find interesting relationships. Okay, so that's the distance correlation. And so I want to maybe quickly show this. This is not in my previous year's notes, but I found this is something worth mentioning. This is a new measure which has been a very, I would say, popular topic or highlight in statistics research recently. So this is called Chatterjee is a professor at Stanford. So he wrote a short paper about the new coefficient of correlation. So this is something I will post to the CCLE so you can read. So this one is actually similar to the idea of maximal correlation and distance correlation. Try to be flexible in terms of the relationship you can capture. Try to be 0 if and only if the two variables are independent. But it's defined based on ranks. So basically, you can see this is the definition when there are no ties. Okay, so what it does is that since by assuming those are the pairs are these, right? So they arrange the pairs by sorting the x's. So x's is sorted in an increasing order. And then they look at the ranks of the corresponding y's. So basically, let Ri be the rank of Yi. Okay, so with that, then they just define using the ranks of Yi's. So you can see that it's only based on ranks instead of using the actual values. So that's why this opens up the flexibility of the relationship you can capture and also make it very robust. And most importantly, this one computes very fast. So compared to the distance correlation and also the maximal correlation that uses the alternating algorithm, that's computationally quite intensive. But here, this one computes very fast. So that's why it's very interesting and it can be used for testing independence since it's 0 whenever it's independent, right? However, that 0 is on the population level. On the sample level, because of the sampling uncertainty, randomness, we know it's not exactly 0. But the nice thing is that they show there is a closed form distribution for the measure as n goes to infinity. So we could use this distribution to do the test, compute the p-value. That becomes very efficient. So let me just show you one example about this. So like these are the relationships this measure can capture. Like this is linear, almost no noise. It gives a value close to 1. As we add more noise, the value decreases. And in this shape, we see the same trend, right? This is a high value, it decreases. And finally, this is like a curve from the sine function. So you can see it's oscillating and it still can do a very good job. As the noise increases, it decreases. So what the author pointed out is that this measure outperform, and this is like the theoretical distribution and how it fits to real data. We can see it fits very well. So what the author said is that if they compare this measure to other measures for capturing different relationships in terms of power, which is something you will try in your homework. So this measure is more powerful than the other existing measures when the signal has an oscillatory nature, like the sine curve. But if the curve is very smooth, like the parabola, it's not really the best. So like the power curve will look like something like this. You increase the noise and you calculate the power to see how fast it decreases. Like the D core is what we covered. in the lecture just now. Okay, and also I want to say a little bit about the MIC. MIC is actually actually this is very interesting. The MIC is the measure that published in a science paper when I was a PhD student about to graduate. So at that time, it was a very big news because people know that it's very, very difficult, almost impossible to get a computational method paper published in Science, right? So at that time, people really try to study this MIC. I think it stands for the Maximal Information Coefficient. So briefly, this is a normalized version of mutual information. So we know that mutual information can capture any dependence between two variables, and the MIC normalizes the mutual information to the value, to the interval between 0 and 1, because mutual information can go to infinity. So therefore, the MIC claims it to be able to capture all relationships between variables. And I'm also going to post that to CCLE just for information. But the drawback of MIC is that it doesn't have a theoretical justification about its equivalence. So what does it mean by saying, oh, all the relationships are equivalent in MIC? So that doesn't have a theoretical mathematical definition. And that got criticized by some other people after its publication. But anyway, I think it's interesting to know that there are so many measures for capturing different types of associations. And this one, this CSI by Chatterjee, I think is very elegant, simple, and fast to compute. So it has a lot of the advantages people desire. So you can see that the runtime for permutation test of independence, you can see how fast this is compared to other methods. Yeah, so I think the computation speed is definitely its big advantage. All right, so I'm going to share this paper on CCLE. And so finally, before I conclude this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about canonical correlation analysis, CCA, because I think this is very useful in a lot of our research. Okay, so let's come back to notes. Okay, so I'll just put that maybe the number 3 is the Chatterjee's CSI-N correlation. So this one will be posted as a reading material, optional reading material if you're interested. The last one is the MIC, that science paper. So these two will be posted. So the final topic is the canonical correlation analysis. Short as CCA. So you may consider the CCA just as a generalization of PCA from one matrix to two matrices. So let's say PCA has only one matrix, M by P, N observations, P features, while here CCA deals with two matrices, X and Y, M by P and M by Q. And please note that the two matrices must have rows matched. So they have the same and the matched in rows. So in other words, you can consider for each observation, I measure its P features in X and I measure its Q features in Y. So what CCA does is trying to find the best linear combination of the P features and the best linear combination of the Q features so that the Pearson correlation of the N observations is maximized. So that's the purpose. So in other words, let's say that we try to find, alpha, that is p-dimensional vector, and beta, that's q-dimensional vector. So once you do the transformation of the P and Q by alpha and beta, so you can see that X alpha is just an n by 1 vector, right? I project all the n observations into one dimension, and Y beta is another n by 1 vector. So I want to maximize the absolute correlation or covariance. These are equivalent of these two things. Okay, if I standardize them to have standard deviation 1, then maximizing the covariance is equal to maximizing the correlation. That's the goal. Okay, and then using a similar derivation of the PCA, so we can show that basically how we are going to find the alpha and beta is also subject to doing that singular value decomposition. So similar idea, but now we have those two matrices to deal with. Okay, so this is the CCA. So then you'll find the first direction, alpha and beta, so that the covariance is maximized. And you can continue. So you can go to, so let's call them alpha 1, beta 1. Then we can continue to go to, say, alpha 2, beta 2. And alpha 2 must have this inner product with alpha 1 equal to 0. And beta 2 must have this inner product of beta 1 to 0. So it means they're uncorrelated. And then given this condition, you try to continue maximizing the covariance. So therefore, doing the CCA, you can convert your original n by p matrix and n by q matrices into n observations, n scalars in the transformation, and n scalars for y, n scalars for x. Then you can compute their correlation. And also, you may actually use this to define a new set of bases. So let's say that if I continue up to alpha k and beta k. So what I can do is that if I just stack them, okay, so if I stack those loadings like alpha 1 to alpha k, so they are k loading vectors, right? Each loading vector is a combination of the p features. And here I can have y multiply beta 1 to beta k. So then you can see each one is an n by k matrix after the product. And then you can see there's a correspondence between the key new features on the left and the k new features on the right. So based on this, you can define some Euclidean distance for each point between the two feature sets. So for example, if for this one, if I expand it, I write it as, say, x1 star to xn star. Okay, so xn star is a row vector, xn star is a row vector. Similarly, if I expand this part to be y1 star to yn star, and here each row is also k-dimensional. So then what I could do is that I could compute like the Euclidean distance between xi star and yi star. I could do this. And what does that mean? So like in the single cell data matching problem, what you can do is that with this distance, or you can do that for any I and j, xi star, yj star for any I and j. You could see if xi is matched well to another yj, if their Euclidean distances are good, then you may find some new matching. So that's something you could play with CCA. And also, I would say that in the single cell matching problem, sometimes you may say that, oh, I started with some cells in two modalities. Let's say the P stands for gene, RNA-seq data. Q stands for peaks, like attack-seq data. And I only have a set of cells measured with both modalities. So using those common cells, you could do CCA. to find the loadings alpha 1 to alpha k for projecting genes, beta 1 to beta k for projecting peaks. And then you can apply these loadings to new cells. That's not part of X. Okay, you can project to new cells in single cell RNA-seq to this common k-dimensional space. For here, you can project new cells with a tag to the space. And for those new cells, you can match them by the Euclidean distance. So there are those uses for this technique. And I think in the Surat pipeline, they use CCA for doing data alignment. Okay, so do we have any questions about these? The CCA can be, and here you can see that we have pairs, but each variable is no longer just one-dimensional, right? And also, of course, for the X and Y, this is also the data where you could apply distance correlation. Right? This distance correlation would be applicable here, but distance correlation is no longer restricted to linear relationships, while CCA is linear relationship. Okay, so that's CCA. Any questions? Okay, so if not, I guess I will just quickly use the remaining 4 minutes to talk about one thing I think is really nice to know, especially for our UCLA students. This one is something which I also personally think is very elegant. It was developed by my senior colleague, Professor Kerchow Lee. So this is called the liquid association. I'll quickly introduce it. And this is short as LA. So that's why I said the name is very relevant. So the liquid association is defined to capture relationship between of a triplet, not just a pair of variable. So it's about X, Y, and Z. Okay. So the motivation is about how the correlation between X and Y changes along the third variable Z. How correlation of X and Y changes with Z. That's the question we try to address. Okay. So in other words, we are interested in the conditional correlation of X and Y given Z. So by fixing Z at a value, so I think the motivation is that you can consider Z as a third master gene, important gene. So when the gene Z is highly expressed, the correlation between X and Y may be positive. But when the gene Z is low expressed, the correlation of X and Y may become negative. So that's the thing you would miss if you just calculate the correlation of X and Y by ignoring Z. So that's the thing I was talking about before. So like if this is X, this is Y, right? And if when Z is high, they are correlated positively. When Z is low, they are correlated negatively. So in this case, if you ignore Z, but just look at X and Y, maybe I should put this way, conditional correlation, you miss this correlation. So that's why this conditional correlation change is the goal. So how do we do? So here we just define, so basically we know that if this X and Y are centered conditional on Z, so we just define this conditional covariance of X and Y or conditional correlation of X and Y by this. So this definition is equal to the conditional covariance if expectation of X given Z is 0, expectation of Y given Z is 0, and also the variances are standardized. So this is how we define the conditional correlation. Okay, and the liquid association of X, Y, liquid association of X and Y given Z is defined as the expectation of this G function's gradient or derivative at Z. So evaluate how fast this G changes as Z changes. If it changes fast, then it suggests that the correlation of X and Y changes a lot as Z changes. Then we find this triplet. So that's the definition. And interestingly, we can show that using this definition. So basically, we can find, this is called, this is a very interesting result. This is called the Stein's lemma. So Stein, it was a former statistics professor at Stanford. He made several fundamental contributions to mathematical statistics, and this is one of them. So the Stein's lemma says this. So if the Z follows standard normal distribution, if you satisfy that, then this expectation can be re-expressed as Z times GZ. So that's the lemma result. And then given this result, we can have a very nice solution for liquid association. That is, the definition of GZ is this. We put it back. So you can see XY given Z. So we have a double expectation. And by applying the Tower rule, the Z, we can put it back to this because Z to the condition is just a constant. We can put it back. So, and double expectation can get canceled. So we just have expectation X, Y, Z. All right. So with this definition, then we can just compute liquid association by averaging, as long as you satisfy the Z variable follows standard normal. So the algorithm, how it works is that it will try to use what we told you as the inverse normal transformation to convert, say, n observations of Z1 to Zm into by this inverse normal transformation so that it will follow standard normal. And then we apply just averaging. So you can see that this can be estimated by simply doing this averaging, okay? But we must have this Z1 to Zm are inversely normal transformed. That's the key. Otherwise, the Stein lemma would not apply. Okay, so I can also post this paper, liquid association, online. So people are, if you are interested, you can check it. But I think this is something people can bear in mind. If you want to examine some triplet relationships, then liquid association can be a try. Okay, so yeah, that's all I want to say about today. So then I will post the homework, and I will see if I will do another optional lecture depending on the feedback. If you have something interesting, if something you're interested in, you want me to talk about, I can do it. Otherwise, then I will see you on next Wednesday for the final presentations. And also, please feel free to contact me if you have anything to discuss about your final project ideas. Okay, so thank you all. And so I'll see you next week. Bye.